My name is Courtney, and I am 23 years old. I spent 18 years living in the shadow of my violent brother while my parents turned a blind eye. They never believed me, never protected me, and always took his side. After enduring almost 2 decades of torment, I finally found the courage to leave. Now 5 years later, my life has completely transformed. Before I share this heartbreaking story, have you ever been bullied by a sibling? Do not forget to like and subscribe if you have struggled with toxic family relationships too. I grew up in what appeared to be a picture-perfect suburban family in Pennsylvania. My father, Brian, worked as an accountant at a respected firm, while my mother, Sarah, taught 2nd grade at the local elementary school. From the outside, we seemed like the ideal American family with our 2 kids, golden retriever named Max, and white picket fence surrounding our modest 2-story home. My brother Jackson was 4 years older than me. He was tall with sandy blonde hair and bright blue eyes that charmed everyone he met. To neighbors, teachers, and family friends, Jackson was the perfect son and big brother. He excelled at sports, particularly baseball and football, maintained honor roll grades, and always presented himself as polite and helpful when adults were around. But behind closed doors, Jackson was an entirely different person. My earliest memories of his bullying behavior started when I was about 5 years old and he was 9. One incident stands out vividly in my mind. I had received a beautiful porcelain doll for my 5th birthday from my grandmother. The doll had long auburn hair, green eyes, and wore a lace dress with tiny pearl buttons. I named her Lily and treasured her above all my other toys. One afternoon, while our parents were busy preparing dinner downstairs, Jackson came into my room where I was playing with Lily. "What a stupid doll," he sneered, standing in my doorway with his arms crossed. "Go away," I said quietly, clutching Lily closer to my chest. Jackson sauntered into my room anyway, ignoring my protest. "Let me see it," he demanded, reaching for the doll. I shook my head and tried to back away, but he was faster and stronger. He grabbed Lily from my hands and examined her with a cruel smile. "Give her back," I cried, trying to reach for my doll. "Fine, have your stupid doll back," Jackson said. Then he deliberately dropped Lily onto the hardwood floor. The porcelain face shattered into dozens of pieces. I burst into tears as I gathered the broken fragments of my beloved doll. Jackson just laughed and said, "Oops, it was an accident. Do not be such a baby." When I later showed my parents the broken doll and told them what happened, Jackson immediately denied it. She was throwing it up in the air and trying to catch it. I told her to be careful, but she would not listen. Then she dropped it, and now she is blaming me. My mother sighed and looked at me with disappointment. "Courtney, you need to be more careful with your special toys, and do not try to blame your brother for your mistakes." "But he did break it. He did it on purpose," I protested through tears. My father patted my head dismissively. "It sounds like an accident to me. These things happen. You are both going to have to learn to get along better." That was the first time I clearly remember feeling the sting of injustice and realizing that my parents would always take Jackson's word over mine. As time went on, Jackson became increasingly creative with his torment. He developed a talent for inflicting pain that left no visible marks both physically and emotionally. He would pinch the sensitive skin under my arms until I had bruises, but they were always in places my parents would never see. He invented cruel nicknames like Stupid Court and Crybaby Courtney that he would whisper when our parents were not listening. Sometimes he would wait until I was carrying something fragile, then stick out his foot to trip me. When I would fall and break whatever I was carrying, he would innocently tell our parents that I was just clumsy. One particularly painful incident happened when I was 7. I had spent hours working on a watercolor painting of our family for an art project at school. I was so proud of my work and left it to dry on my desk overnight. In the morning, I found it ruined with water spilled all over it, the colors bleeding together into an ugly brown mess. When I ran crying to my mother, Jackson quickly explained that he had been bringing me a glass of water because I asked for one, but I had left my painting in a dangerous spot. Once again, my parents believed him without question. "He was just trying to be nice to you," my mother said. "You need to be more responsible with your things, Courtney." "But I did not ask for water," I protested weakly. "He ruined it on purpose." "Enough," my father said firmly. "Your brother was trying to do something nice for you. These accusations have to stop. You are just being too sensitive." The pattern continued throughout my early childhood. Every time Jackson bullied me, and I tried to tell my parents, they dismissed my complaints as exaggerations or outright lies. They often said things like, "That is just how siblings are," or "He is just teasing you because he loves you." Gradually, I began to understand that no one was going to protect me from Jackson. I was completely alone in my suffering, which only made the pain worse. I started to doubt myself and wonder if maybe I really was too sensitive, or if this really was normal sibling behavior. The constant invalidation of my experiences left me feeling confused and increasingly isolated. By age 7, I had learned to hide my tears, because they only seemed to fuel Jackson's satisfaction and my parents' annoyance. I developed strategies to avoid being alone with my brother whenever possible, but in our modest home, that proved challenging. The feeling of walking on eggshells became my constant companion as I navigated my childhood home like it was a minefield, never knowing when Jackson would strike next. As I entered elementary school, the dynamic with Jackson took on new, more sophisticated dimensions. Between ages 8 and 11, I watched my brother evolve from an opportunistic bully into a calculated tormentor who understood exactly how to terrorize me while maintaining his golden boy image. Jackson, now a middle schooler and later a high school freshman, had perfected the art of threatening me into silence. "If you tell Mum and Dad about anything I do," he would whisper when we were alone, "I will make sure everyone at school knows what a pathetic loser you are. No one will ever be your friend." His threats were not empty. Jackson seemed to have an uncanny ability to influence even children several years younger than him. When I was in 4th grade, I finally managed to make a friend named Tiffany. We bonded over our shared love of drawing and spent lunch periods sketching together. For the first time, I felt like I had someone in my corner. That friendship lasted exactly 2 weeks before Tiffany suddenly stopped talking to me. Later, I overheard her telling another girl, Jackson told his friends to tell their little sisters not to hang out with Courtney because she does weird things at home and makes up lies about people. This pattern repeated itself throughout elementary school. Any time I started to form a friendship, Jackson would somehow sabotage it. He spread rumors that I still wet the bed, that I picked my nose and ate it, that I had lice, or that I stole things from other kids' backpacks. Being the popular, charming older brother that everyone admired, his words carried weight even among my own peers. At home, Jackson became more strategic about his torment. He would wait until our parents were occupied or out of earshot before unleashing his cruelty. One of his favorite tactics was hiding my school supplies and belongings. The night before a big test or important school project was due, my textbook would mysteriously disappear, only to reappear the next morning after I had spent hours frantically searching and stressing about it. "Looking for something?" he would ask with a smirk at breakfast, as my textbook or homework assignment suddenly appeared in an obvious place where I had already looked multiple times. When I was 10, I had a major book report due on Bridge to Terabithia. Guessing, I had worked on it diligently for weeks, carefully writing my report and creating a diorama of one of the scenes. The night before it was due, both the report and diorama vanished from my desk. I tore my room apart looking for them, eventually breaking down in tears. When I approached my parents, Jackson was right there beside me looking concerned. "Mom, Dad, I cannot find my book report and diorama. They were on my desk and now they are gone," I explained, my voice shaking. Before my parents could respond, Jackson jumped in. "I saw her working on it earlier today, but then she went outside to play. Maybe she forgot where she put it." I did not go outside to play. I left it right on my desk. I insisted, feeling the familiar frustration rising. My father sighed. "Courtney, you need to be more responsible with your schoolwork. You cannot always blame others for your disorganization." "But I am not." Jackson took it. "I know he did." My mother gave me a stern look. "That is enough. Your brother is trying to help and you are accusing him again. This has to stop." Late that night, after hours of trying to recreate my work through tears, I heard a soft thud outside my bedroom door. There was my book report and diorama, slightly damaged, but mostly intact. Jackson had waited until the last possible moment to return them, ensuring maximum distress but still allowing me to turn something in. The next morning at breakfast, he acted completely normal, even asking how my book report turned out. When I glared at him, he just smiled innocently. Our parents noticed the tension, and my mother said, "Courtney, your brother asked you a question. Do not be rude." These incidents became increasingly common. Jackson would delete files from the family computer where I stored school essays. He would accidentally spill juice on my books. He would hide the permission slips I brought home until it was almost too late to return them. Each time when I accused him, he had a perfectly reasonable explanation that our parents readily accepted. I tried different approaches to convince my parents of what was happening. Once when I was 11, I broke down completely during dinner after Jackson had spent the afternoon whispering insults and pinching me under the table while our parents were distracted with conversation. "Please," I sobbed. "Jackson keeps hurting me and saying mean things. He pinched me under the table just now." My mother looked exasperated. "I did not see anything. Jackson, did you pinch your sister?" "No, Mom, I was just eating my dinner," he replied, looking genuinely confused. My father put down his fork. "Courtney, this has got to stop. These constant accusations are creating unnecessary drama in this family." "But it is true," I insisted, pulling up my sleeve to show a red mark on my arm. "You could have done that to yourself," my mother said dismissively. "You have been watching too many of those dramatic shows on television." That night, Jackson came to my room doorway. "They will never believe you, you know," he said quietly. "I am their perfect son. You are just the whiny little daughter who makes up stories for attention." As the years of elementary school progressed, I developed strategies for self-preservation. I learnt to keep my most precious possessions hidden or with me at all times. I started keeping a spare set of school supplies in my locker. I became extremely organized, making copies of important homework and storing them in different locations. I kept my personal thoughts in a password-protected document rather than a physical journal Jackson could find. Most painfully, I learnt to expect no support or protection from my parents. Each failed attempt to make them see the truth only strengthened their perception of me as overly sensitive or attention-seeking. The constant invalidation made me start to doubt my own experiences. Maybe I was exaggerating, maybe this was normal sibling behavior, and I was just too weak to handle it. By the time I finished elementary school, I had become withdrawn and suspicious. The outgoing, happy little girl I had once been was replaced by a cautious, quiet preteen who trusted almost no one and expected the worst from people. The sense of isolation was profound, but it was about to get even worse as we both entered the volatile teenage years. The transition to middle school brought new levels of sophistication to Jackson's campaign of torment. While I navigated the already challenging landscape of adolescence, my brother, now 16 to 19 years old, during this period seemed to take special pleasure in intensifying his psychological warfare. When I was 13, I developed a passion for photography. My art teacher had recognized my eye for composition and encouraged me to join the photography club. For the first time, I found something that was truly mine, something Jackson knew nothing about. I saved my allowance for months to buy a second-hand digital camera, and I treasured it, taking photographs of everything from urban landscapes to close-ups of flowers and insects. Photography became my escape, my way of processing the emotions I could not express at home. I spent hours working on a portfolio for a youth photography contest, carefully selecting and editing my best images. The night before the submission deadline, I had everything ready on a USB drive and left it in my desk drawer. The next morning, the USB drive was exactly where I had left it. But when I checked the contents at school, I found that all my photographs had been replaced with random internet images and memes. Some were even inappropriate pictures that would have gotten me in serious trouble if a teacher had seen them. In that moment, sitting in the school computer lab, I felt a wave of devastation that almost drowned me. I knew exactly who was responsible. Jackson had enough technical knowledge to easily access my files and sabotage my work. What hurt even more than losing months of creative effort was the deliberate cruelty of the act, the calculated decision to destroy something he knew was deeply important to me. That evening, I confronted Jackson when our parents were both home, hoping their presence might force some honesty. "You deleted all my photographs and replaced them with garbage," I said, my voice shaking with both anger and fear. "That was months of work for a contest I can no longer enter." Jackson looked at me with perfectly feigned confusion, then concern. "What? I have no idea what you are talking about. Why would I do that?" My mother intervened immediately. "Courtney, do you have any proof that your brother did this?" "Who else would have done it?" I countered. "No one else lives in our house or would have access to my room." "That is not proof," my father said firmly. "You cannot accuse people without evidence. Maybe you accidentally deleted the files yourself." "I did not," I protested, tears welling in my eyes. "Why do you always take his side? Why can you not see what he does to me?" My mother exchanged a worried glance with my father. "I think all these hormones are making you irrational, honey. This is just part of being a teenage girl. "This has nothing to do with hormones," I shouted, losing control of my emotions. "Jackson has been tormenting me for years, and you have never believed me, not once." My father's voice hardened. "That is enough. Go to your room until you can speak respectfully." As I turned to leave, I caught Jackson's expression. Behind our parents' backs, he was smiling. The incident with the photography contest marked a turning point. Jackson seemed to realize he could not only get away with tormenting me, but could actually manipulate our parents into seeing me as the problem. His tactics evolved accordingly. He began accessing my private communications whenever possible. Once he managed to get into my social media account and sent embarrassing messages to people at school, including a boy I had a crush on. By the time I discovered what had happened, the damage was done. Rumors spread quickly through school that I was desperate and weird. At 15, I started keeping a journal as suggested by the school counselor, who had noticed my increasing withdrawal and anxiety but never fully understood its source. Writing down my thoughts and feelings provided some relief from the constant stress at home. I was careful to keep the journal with me at all times, never leaving it where Jackson might find it. One weekend, when I was at a required study session at school, Jackson ransacked my room and found the journal hidden inside a hollowed-out book. When I returned home, pages from my journal had been posted on the refrigerator and scattered around the house, with my most private thoughts and fears on display for everyone to see. My parents were reading some of the pages. When I walked in, their expressions concerned but not sympathetic. "Courtney, we need to talk about these things you have written," my mother said, holding pages where I had detailed my feelings of betrayal and abandonment by my parents, my hatred toward Jackson, and even some dark thoughts about wanting to run away. "Those are private," I screamed frantically, gathering the pages, humiliation burning through me. "How could you read this?" "We found these pages all over the house," my father explained. Jackson came to us very concerned. He said he found one page in the hallway and then realized there were more scattered around. "And you believed that?" I asked incredulously. "He obviously broke into my room, stole my journal, and did this deliberately to humiliate me." My mother's voice was gentle but dismissive. "Honey, the things you have written here are very troubling. I think we should consider getting you some professional help." "I am not the one who needs help," I shouted. "Jackson is the one who is disturbed. He has been psychologically torturing me for years." My father's expression hardened. "That is a very serious accusation, Courtney. I think your mother is right. You seem to have developed an unhealthy fixation on blaming your brother for everything wrong in your life. Maybe we should look into family therapy," my mother suggested to my father, as if I was not even in the room. "I am not going to therapy to be told there is something wrong with me," I said, my voice breaking. "The problem is that no one in this family will acknowledge what Jackson does." My parents exchanged that familiar worried look that I had grown to hate, the one that said they thought I was being irrational and difficult. "We will talk about this when you have calmed down," my father said finally. That night, Jackson came to my bedroom doorway while I was trying to reorganize my violated journal. "You know," he said casually, leaning against the doorframe, "they are talking about sending you to a therapist now, maybe even medication. Keep pushing and they might decide you need more serious intervention. Troubled teens get sent away sometimes, do not they?" The threat was clear and it worked. I stopped trying to convince my parents about Jackson's behavior. Instead, I withdrew, further spending as much time away from home as possible, staying late at school for clubs or study sessions, going to the public library until closing time, anything to avoid being in the same space as Jackson. My grades suffered as anxiety and depression took a deeper hold. Sleep became elusive, plagued by nightmares when it came at all. I lost weight as my appetite diminished. Teachers noticed the change in me, and a few tried to intervene, asking if everything was okay at home. Once in a moment of desperate hope, I confided in my English teacher, Ms. Peterson, telling her about the years of psychological abuse from my brother and my parents' refusal to believe me. She listened sympathetically and promised to speak with the school counselor. A week later, I was called into a meeting with my parents, the counselor, and Ms. Peterson. What I had hoped would be intervention turned into another betrayal. "Courtney has shared some concerning things about her home life," the counselor began carefully. My parents looked genuinely surprised and concerned. My mother even had tears in her eyes. "We had no idea she was feeling this way," my father said, sounding genuinely distressed. Jackson, who had been invited to the meeting as well, looked appropriately solemn and confused. "I knew we had normal sibling arguments sometimes, but I had no idea Courtney felt like I was bullying her. He said, his voice perfect in its false sincerity, "I feel terrible that she has been feeling this way." The meeting proceeded with everyone discussing how we could improve our family communication and relationship. Plans were made for weekly check-ins with the counsellor. My parents promised to be more attentive to the perceived issues between Jackson and me. On the drive home, once we were alone as a family, the facade dropped. "How could you humiliate us like that?" my father demanded. "Telling your teachers that we are bad parents and that Jackson is abusing you. Do you have any idea how that makes us look?" "But it is true," I said quietly from the back seat. "No, Courtney, it is not true," my mother said firmly. "It is your perception, and perceptions can be wrong. You are going through a difficult phase right now, and we understand that. But dragging the school into our private family matters is unacceptable." Jackson remained silent, but I could see his satisfied smile reflected in the car window. He had won again, and he knew it. I was completely alone with even the adults who should have protected me, now convinced that I was the problem. That night I cried until I had no tears left, feeling a profound sense of despair and helplessness. The walls of my home had become the walls of a prison, and there seemed to be no escape. But somewhere in the darkness of that night, a tiny seed of determination took root. If no one would help me, then I would have to help myself. I just needed to survive long enough to make that possible. The years between 16 and 18 were simultaneously the darkest and most transformative of my young life. As Jackson moved on to college, I foolishly believed that his absence would provide relief. Instead, his returns home during breaks and holidays became even more intense periods of psychological warfare, as if he needed to make up for lost time. The breaking point came during winter break of my junior year. Jackson, now in his second year of college, had returned home with all the confidence and arrogance that came with his newfound independence. I was in the midst of my college application process, working diligently to create pathways out of my toxic home environment. I had excelled academically, despite the challenges at home, viewing education as my ticket to freedom. My guidance counselor had encouraged me to apply for several competitive scholarships, and I had spent months perfecting my essays, gathering recommendations, and completing applications. One particular scholarship offered by a foundation supporting students who had overcome significant adversity seemed tailor-made for me. Without revealing the full extent of my home situation, I had written an essay about finding strength through personal challenges and developing resilience. If awarded, this scholarship would cover nearly all my tuition at several of the universities I had applied to, universities deliberately chosen for their distance from home. I had saved all my scholarship materials in a folder on my laptop with backups on a cloud service, having learned the hard way about Jackson's propensity for sabotage. What I had not anticipated was how far he would go to undermine my future. One evening, while I was at a mandatory National Honor Society meeting, Jackson apparently gained access to my laptop. Despite my password protection, he managed to get in, likely having watched me enter the password at some point during his visit. When I returned home and checked my email, my blood ran cold. There were confirmation messages showing that all my scholarship applications had been withdrawn. In a panic, I called the scholarship officers the next morning, only to discover that most of them had received emails from me stating that I was no longer interested in being considered. The timing could not have been worse, as most deadlines had passed, making it impossible to reapply. The foundation offering the major scholarship informed me that they had received a follow-up email confessing that I had fabricated portions of my essay, effectively blacklisting me from future consideration. When I confronted Jackson, he did not even bother to deny it, secure in his knowledge that our parents would never believe me over him. "You should have used a better password," he said with a shrug when I cornered him alone in the kitchen. "Besides, you do not deserve those scholarships. You have always been the family victim, using your so-called problems to get attention and special treatment. I just made sure the scholarship committees knew the truth about you." I was shaking with rage and despair. "Why do you hate me so much? What did I ever do to you?" His expression changed then, showing a glimpse of something cold and calculated that had always lurked beneath his charming facade. "You existed," he said simply. "You came along and suddenly I was not special anymore. Everyone was too busy fawning over the new baby to notice me. But I made sure they noticed me again, did not I? I made sure I was the perfect son while you became the problem child. It worked out perfectly." His words hit me like a physical blow. The casual cruelty, the years of deliberate torment, all stemming from such a basic sibling jealousy, that had morphed into something twisted and sadistic over the years. "You are sick," I whispered, "and no one will ever believe you if you tell them that," he replied with absolute confidence. When I tried to tell my parents about the sabotaged scholarship applications, their response was predictable. "Why would Jackson do such a thing?" my mother asked, genuinely bewildered. "He has his own college career to focus on," my father added. "He would not waste time sabotaging yours. Maybe you withdrew the applications yourself and now you are having regrets," my mother suggested. "It is normal to feel overwhelmed by the college process." "I did not withdraw them," I insisted, tears of frustration streaming down my face. "Why would I sabotage my own future?" My father sighed heavily. "Courtney, this obsession with blaming your brother for everything negative in your life has to stop. It is not healthy. Maybe we should revisit the idea of therapy." "Fine," I said, suddenly calm as a clarity I had never experienced before washed over me. "Set up therapy, but I want to see someone on my own, not as a family." My parents looked surprised by my sudden agreement but nodded cautiously. Little did they know that I had already made a decision that would change the course of my life. That night, I began planning my escape in earnest. I had always known that I would leave home for college, but now I understood that I needed a complete break, a clean severance from my toxic family dynamic. I could not count on financial support from my parents, given the ongoing tension, so I needed to become completely self-sufficient. Over the next several months, I took on 2 part-time jobs in addition to my schoolwork. I worked weekends at a local cafe and evenings at a retail store in the mall. Every dollar I earned went into a bank account. I had opened at a different bank from the one my parents used, ensuring they had no access to or knowledge of my funds. I reached out to my Aunt Lisa, my mother's sister who lived in Colorado. Though we were not especially close, Lisa had always been kind to me and seemed to view Jackson with a degree of skepticism that suggested she might have seen through his facade. Without revealing everything, I asked if I could stay with her temporarily after graduation while I figured out my next steps. To my relief, she agreed. I secured my essential documents, making copies of my birth certificate and social security card, and keeping them with my passport in a locked box at a friend's house. I researched affordable colleges in Colorado that might still accept late applications or where I could apply for the spring semester if necessary. As graduation approached, I felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. The prospect of leaving was simultaneously frightening and liberating. I had never lived away from home, never been truly independent, and yet staying had become unbearable. Every day under the same roof as Jackson during his summer break was a day spent in psychological combat, and I was exhausted. The most difficult part was dealing with the guilt. Despite everything, these were my parents. They had provided for me materially, if not emotionally. They had not been deliberately cruel like Jackson, just willfully blind. Did I owe them a more gradual separation? Would a complete break hurt them unnecessarily? These questions plagued me as I finalized my plans. In the end, it was Jackson himself who eliminated any lingering doubt I might have had. A week before graduation, I discovered a small camera hidden in my bedroom, positioned to view my entire room. When I traced the wiring, I found it connected to a receiver in Jackson's closet. The violation was so extreme, so calculated, that it crystallized everything for me. This was not normal sibling rivalry gone wrong. This was predatory behavior that my parents had enabled for years. This time, I did not even bother telling my parents about the camera. I knew what their response would be. Instead, I removed it, destroyed it, and accelerated my plans to leave. On graduation day, I went through the motions, accepting my diploma, with a smile, posing for family photos, pretending everything was normal. My parents hosted a small celebration at our house, where family and close friends congratulated me on my academic achievements and asked about my college plans. I gave vague answers about still deciding on the right fit, which my parents attributed to the scholarship disappointments. The next morning, while my parents were at work and Jackson was out with friends, I packed everything I could fit into my small car, left a letter on my bed explaining that I needed space, and would contact them when I was ready, and drove away from the only home I had ever known. As the distance between me and that house grew, I felt the weight of 18 years of psychological torment begin to lift. For the first time in my memory, I could breathe freely. I was terrified of the unknown future, but even more terrified of the known past. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what lay behind. The transition to independence was both liberating and terrifying. I arrived at my Aunt Lisa's home in Colorado after a 3-day cross-country drive, exhausted but filled with a strange new sense of possibility. While I had told her I needed a fresh start after some family tensions, I had not shared the full extent of Jackson's abuse or my parents' enabling behavior. "You can stay as long as you need to figure things out," she assured me, helping carry my bags into her modest guest room. Sometimes a little distance from family is the healthiest thing, especially at your age. Living with Aunt Lisa gave me my first glimpse of what a peaceful home environment could feel like. There were no eggshells to walk on, no need to check my room for hidden cameras, or secure my belongings against sabotage. The simple absence of constant anxiety was almost disorienting. Within 2 weeks of arriving in Colorado, I secured a job as a barista at a local coffee shop. The pay was modest, but the tips were decent, and the flexible schedule would accommodate classes when I started college. I also found a second job doing administrative work at a small photography studio, which rekindled my interest in photography that Jackson had so deliberately tried to destroy. My parents called and texted constantly during those first few weeks. Their messages ranged from concerned to angry, demanding explanations and insisting I return home. Jackson predictably played the role of the worried brother, texting that he just wanted to make sure I was safe, and that he did not understand why I had left so suddenly. I responded minimally, mainly to assure them I was physically safe, but maintained firm boundaries. I did not share my location beyond saying I was staying with a relative, did not engage with their demands for explanations, and kept conversations brief when I did pick up the phone. "You have always chosen to believe Jackson over me," I told my mother during one particularly difficult call. "For 18 years, I tried to make you see what was happening, and for 18 years you chose not to. I need space to heal from that." "You are being dramatic, Shaba," she responded predictably. "Every family has its problems, but running away is not the solution." "I did not run away," I corrected her. "I am an adult who chose to leave an unhealthy environment. There is a difference." The hardest part of those early days was the doubt that occasionally crept in. Had I overreacted? Was I throwing away my relationship with my parents because of Jackson? Would I regret this clean break someday? The years of gaslighting had left their mark, making me question my own perceptions and decisions, even as I knew in my heart that leaving had been necessary for my survival. After 3 months of working 2 jobs and saving aggressively, I had enough money to move into a small studio apartment that I shared with a roommate named Zoe, a nursing student I had met at the coffee shop. The apartment was tiny and sparsely furnished with second-hand items, but it was mine, a space where I felt safe. Through Zoe, I began to build a small circle of friends, people with no connection to my past, who took me as I was in the present. We would gather for movie nights, hikes in the nearby mountains, or simply coffee and conversation. Slowly, I began to recognize the person I might have been all along, if not for the shadow of Jackson's torment, outgoing, creative, even funny. With Aunt Lisa's encouragement, I applied to the local community college for the spring semester planning to complete general requirements before transferring to a 4-year university. Without the scholarships that Jackson had sabotaged, my educational path would be longer and require more work alongside studies, but it was still a path forward. "You have a resilience that many people twice your age lack," Aunt Lisa told me one evening as we shared dinner at her home, a weekly tradition we had established. "Most people would have crumbled under the circumstances you described, but here you are building a new life." I had finally shared more details about my relationship with Jackson and my parents with her, finding in her an ally who did not question my perception or minimize my experiences. Her validation was healing in ways I had not anticipated. "I spent so many years believing there was something wrong with me," I admitted. "That maybe I was too sensitive or imagining things like my parents always said." "That is what happens when people gaslight you for long enough," she replied. "You start to doubt your own reality. But trust me, Courtney, what you described is not normal sibling behavior. It is abuse, and your parents failed you by not protecting you from it." Hearing someone finally name what I had experienced was surprisingly emotional. I had never allowed myself to use the word abuse, feeling it was somehow too dramatic or would be seen as another exaggeration. But that is exactly what it had been: years of systematic psychological abuse that had shaped my development and sense of self. The hardest days were holidays and family milestones. On Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents expressing hurt that I had chosen to abandon the family on an important day. Christmas brought guilt-inducing voicemails about how this was tearing the family apart and breaking your mother's heart. My father even tried a different approach, offering to pay for my education if I would come home and work through these issues as a family. The financial temptation was real, given my limited resources, but the strings attached were ones I could no longer accept. I appreciate the offer, I told him during a rare phone call, but I need to do this on my own terms. My independence is not negotiable. My parents never once acknowledged the real reason for my departure, or took responsibility for their role in enabling Jackson's behavior. In their narrative, I was still the problem, the oversensitive daughter who had inexplicably cut off her loving family. Jackson, meanwhile, continued to present himself as the concerned, confused brother who just wanted to reconnect with his sister. 6 months into my new life, I received an email from Jackson that demonstrated he had not changed at all. "I know where you are now, little sister. Aunt Lisa should be more careful about what she posts on social media. Remember, you can run, but you cannot hide from family. I will always find you." The message sent a chill through me, reminiscent of the fear I had lived with for so long, but this time I had something I had never had before: distance and agency. I blocked his email address, increased security on my social media accounts, and asked Aunt Lisa to be careful about sharing any information that might reveal my location. This incident, rather than derailing my progress, strengthened my resolve. I would not be intimidated or controlled any longer. I began seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma, working through the layers of anxiety and self-doubt that years of gaslighting had built up. What your brother did and what your parents allowed was never about you, my therapist explained during one particularly breakthrough session. It was about their own issues and limitations. You were just a convenient target. Slowly, painfully, I began to internalize this truth. The guilt I carried began to lift as I recognized that protecting myself was not an act of cruelty toward my parents, but an act of necessary self-preservation. I could acknowledge that they had provided materially for me, while also recognizing that they had fundamentally failed me emotionally. By the end of my first year away from home, my life had taken shape in ways I could never have imagined while living under my parents' roof. I was excelling in my college courses, had been promoted at the coffee shop, and had developed a small but genuine circle of friends who knew the real me. Most importantly, I was beginning to recognize myself in the mirror again. The constant fear and hypervigilance that had characterized my childhood was slowly being replaced by a cautious confidence. I still had nightmares, occasionally still flinched at certain triggers, but I was healing one day at a time in the safety of the life I had built for myself. The 5 years that followed my departure from home were a gradual journey of healing, self-discovery, and growth. Each year brought new challenges, but also new strengths as I rebuilt my life on my own terms. During the first 2 years, I focused intensely on my education and therapy. Community college classes provided the foundation I needed while working my way through an associate's degree in communications. My therapist, Dr. Amanda Winters, specialized in family trauma and helped me understand the patterns that had defined my childhood. "What you experienced was a perfect storm of family dysfunction," she explained during one session. "Jackson likely has narcissistic tendencies that your parents either could not or would not recognize. Their inability to see his behavior objectively created the perfect environment for psychological abuse to flourish." Working with Dr. Winters, I began to understand that my parents' failure was not necessarily due to a lack of love, but rather their own limitations and blind spots. This did not excuse their behavior, but it helped me contextualize it in a way that was less personally painful. "People can love their children and still fail them profoundly," she said. "The two are not mutually exclusive." This perspective helped ease some of the anger and betrayal I felt, making room for a more nuanced understanding of my family dynamic. I was not ready to forgive, but I could begin to process my experiences without being consumed by them. After completing my associate's degree, I transferred to the University of Colorado to pursue a bachelor's degree in media studies with a minor in psychology. The combination felt right, allowing me to explore my creative interests while also understanding the human mind and behavior that had so shaped my early life. Financially, these years were challenging. I worked multiple jobs, applied for every scholarship and grant available, and lived frugally in shared apartments with roommates. The financial independence was worth the struggle, as it meant no one had leverage over my choices or future. Throughout this time, My parents continued their efforts to re-establish contact on their terms. Their approaches evolved from angry demands to guilt-inducing pleas to concerned inquiries about my well-being. What never changed was their refusal to acknowledge the real reason I had left, or their role in enabling Jackson's abuse. "We miss you so much, sweetie," my mother would say in voicemails. "We just do not understand why you had to cut us off completely. Whatever issues we had, we could have worked through them together as a family. Your brother asks about you all the time," my father would add in his messages. "He is really hurt that you have shut him out like this." These messages were painful reminders of the gaslighting that had characterized my childhood. Even now, with years of distance, they could not or would not see the truth. Their perception of reality remained fundamentally different from mine, and there seemed to be no bridge across that divide. In my third year away from home, I met Thomas, a graduate student in environmental science, who would eventually become my boyfriend. Our relationship developed slowly as my trust issues made intimacy challenging. "I need you to know that I come with a lot of baggage," I told him honestly after we had been dating for a few months. "My family history has left me with some scars that are still healing." "We all have baggage," he replied. "The question is whether we are willing to work on unpacking it together." Thomas's patience and consistency were healing in ways I hadn't anticipated. He never pressured me to reconnect with my family or question my account of what had happened. His simple acceptance of my experiences as valid was a profound contrast to the invalidation I had grown up with. Through Thomas, I gained an extended network of friends and eventually what felt like a chosen family. Holiday gatherings with his parents and siblings showed me what healthy family dynamics could look like. Disagreements without manipulation, support without conditions, love without control. By my 4th year away, I had developed enough confidence and stability to pursue my passion for photography again. I started a small side business doing portrait photography and event coverage, reclaiming the creative outlet that Jackson had once tried to destroy. Each successful project, each satisfied client felt like a small victory over the past proof that Jackson's efforts to undermine my confidence and potential had ultimately failed. In my final year of college, as I approached graduation with honors, my parents made their most significant attempt to re-enter my life. They discovered where I was attending university through a family friend and showed up unannounced at my apartment one weekend. Seeing them standing at my door after nearly 5 years was jarring. My mother looked older with more grey in her hair. My father seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than the figure who had loomed so large in my childhood. "We had to see you," my mother explained tearfully. "5 years is too long, Courtney. Whatever happened in the past, we are still your parents." I invited them in, surprising even myself with the gesture. The conversation that followed was tense but civil. They asked about my studies, my work, my life in Colorado. I answered honestly but maintained clear boundaries, sharing only what I felt comfortable revealing. When they inevitably broached the subject of reconciliation and family healing, I was prepared. "I have built a good life here," I told them calmly. "I am graduating soon. I have meaningful work. I have people who support me unconditionally. I am not interested in returning to a dynamic where my experiences are invalidated and my boundaries are not respected." "We have always loved you," my father insisted. "Maybe we made mistakes, but what parent does not? Cutting us off completely seems extreme." "It was not extreme," I replied, feeling a strength and clarity I had worked hard to achieve. "It was necessary for my well-being. And the fact that after 5 years you still frame this as me overreacting rather than responding to years of abuse shows that nothing has fundamentally changed." "Abuse is a very strong word," my mother said, visibly flinching. "Jackson was just being a typical brother. All siblings fight." Her response confirmed what I had suspected. They were still unwilling or unable to acknowledge the reality of what had happened in our home. The conversation ended with no real resolution, just a clearer understanding of the unbridgeable gap between our perspectives. After they left, I expected to feel devastated or set back in my healing process. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. For the first time, I had stood my ground with them as an adult, clearly articulating my boundaries and needs without being swayed by guilt or obligation. That interaction proved to be a turning point in my recovery. I realized that I no longer needed their validation to know that my experiences were real. I no longer felt compelled to make them understand or acknowledge what had happened. Their perception no longer defined my reality. By the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I had secured a position with a digital marketing agency that valued my combination of communication skills and photography background. I had a stable relationship, a circle of trusted friends, and a clear sense of my own worth, independent of family validation. 5 years after leaving home, I was not just surviving, but thriving. The scared, broken 18-year-old who had fled in the night had become a confident, successful 23-year-old woman with boundaries, support systems, and goals for the future. The journey had not been easy or linear. There had been setbacks, days when the pain and anger felt as fresh as the day I left, moments of doubt and loneliness. But each challenge had ultimately strengthened my resolve and clarified my path forward. I had learned that family is not defined by blood, but by respect, support, and unconditional positive regard. I had built my own version of family with people who valued me for exactly who I was, not who they needed me to be. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my narrative from those who had tried to write it for me. My story was now my own to tell, shaped by past trauma, but not defined by it, acknowledging pain, but focused on growth and possibility. The journey of healing was ongoing, and I suspected it always would be. But for the first time in my life, I was walking that path on my own terms in my own way toward a future of my own choosing. 5 years after walking away from my family home, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox that would prompt me to finally share my story publicly. The sender was a name I recognized immediately, Amanda Powell, my high school English teacher, who had briefly tried to intervene on my behalf all those years ago. "Courtney," the email began, "I hope this message finds you well. I've often wondered what became of you after graduation. Recently, I encountered a situation with another student that reminded me strongly of our conversations about your home life. If you're willing, I'd appreciate your insight on how I might better support this student. Your perspective would be invaluable." Reading those words triggered a cascade of emotions. Ms. Powell had been one of the few adults who had at least tried to help, even if her efforts had ultimately been undermined by my parents and Jackson. The thought that another student might be experiencing similar abuse made my stomach clench. After careful consideration, I replied, sharing some of my experiences and offering suggestions on how she might advocate more effectively for this student than she had been able to for me. Our correspondence evolved into a phone call, during which she apologized for not doing more. "The system failed you," she said, her voice thick with regret. "I should have pushed harder, seen through your parents' facade more clearly." "You were one of the only people who even tried," I assured her. That meant something even if it didn't change the outcome. This exchange became a catalyst for reflection on how far I had come and how much I had overcome. It also made me consider how many others might be suffering in silence, as I had gaslit by the very people who should be protecting them, convinced that their perceptions were wrong or that they were somehow to blame for their mistreatment. In the years since leaving home, I had built a fulfilling life. My career in digital marketing had flourished, allowing me to combine my communication skills and creative eye for photography. I had recently been promoted to team leader, managing a group of content creators for a respected agency. My relationship with Thomas had deepened, and we were discussing marriage and possibly starting a family in the future, though the thought of parenthood still triggered complex emotions given my own childhood. My relationship with my parents remained distant, but no longer contentious. After their unexpected visit the previous year, we had settled into a pattern of occasional text messages and birthday cards. They had finally stopped pressuring me to reconcile with Jackson, perhaps finally accepting that this boundary at least was non-negotiable. Jackson himself had attempted to contact me several times over the years, each message framed as an innocent attempt to reconnect, but always containing subtle reminders of his power or veiled threats. I had maintained complete silence in response, refusing to engage in any way. According to my parents' occasional updates, he had married and was working in finance, his charming facade still firmly in place with everyone around him. The conversation with Ms. Powell prompted me to finally seek therapy again, this time not just to heal from my past, but to consider how I might use my experiences to help others. Dr. Winters, who had been so instrumental in my early healing process, welcomed me back with warmth. "You've done remarkable work building your life," she observed after we caught up. "Now you're in a position to consider how your story might serve a greater purpose, if that's something you want." And I discovered that I did want that. The thought that my experiences, painful as they had been, might help someone else recognize and escape a similar situation gave new meaning to what I had endured. With Dr. Winter's support, I began writing about my experiences first in a private journal, then in anonymous posts on forums for survivors of family abuse. The response was overwhelming, with numerous comments from people who saw their own situations reflected in my words. "You've described exactly what my brother does to me, but I could never put it into words," one person wrote. "For the first time, I don't feel crazy for thinking something is wrong." These connections reinforced what I had come to understand through my own healing journey. The most insidious aspect of psychological abuse is how it makes you doubt your own perceptions, how it convinces you that you are the problem rather than the person being harmed. As I shared more of my story online, I received a message from a producer of a podcast about family dynamics and mental health, asking if I would be willing to be interviewed anonymously about my experiences. After careful consideration and discussion with Thomas and Dr. Winters, I agreed. The podcast interview was both challenging and cathartic. Speaking my truth aloud to an audience, even anonymously, required a vulnerability I had not anticipated. But the feedback that followed confirmed I had made the right choice. Listeners wrote in describing how hearing my story had given them the courage to establish boundaries with toxic family members or seek help for their own situations. One particular message stood out. "I'm a parent who realized while listening that I might be doing to my daughter what your parents did to you, always taking her brother's side and dismissing her concerns. Your story has been a wake-up call. I've scheduled family therapy and am committed to making changes before it's too late." The thought that my pain might prevent someone else's was profoundly healing. It didn't erase what had happened or make it somehow worth it, but it did provide a sense of purpose and meaning that helped integrate these experiences into the person I had become. 5 years after leaving, I finally understood that healing isn't about forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It's about reclaiming your narrative, establishing your autonomy, and choosing how your past will inform but not dictate your future. The most profound lesson I had learned was that the opinions and perceptions of others, even those who should love you most, do not define your reality or your worth. Truth exists independent of whether others acknowledge it. Pain is valid even when others minimize it. Your experiences are real even when others deny them. I had also learned that family is not determined by blood, but by respect, support, and unconditional positive regard. The family I had built for myself, comprising friends, colleagues, and Thomas, provided the emotional safety and validation that my biological family had not. Looking back at the frightened 18-year-old who had packed her car and driven away from the only home she had ever known, I felt immense compassion and pride. That scared girl had possessed more courage than she knew, taking a leap of faith into the unknown, rather than continuing to endure the familiar pain of invalidation and abuse. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments of crippling doubt, nights spent questioning my decisions, days when the weight of estrangement felt unbearable. Financial struggles, loneliness, and the constant work of rebuilding my sense of self had all taken their toll. But sitting in my sunlit apartment 5 years later, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived, I knew without question that leaving had been the right choice. The pain of breaking ties had been acute but finite. The pain of staying would have been chronic and corrosive, slowly eroding my spirit until there was nothing left. For anyone who might be experiencing what I did, who might be questioning their perceptions or blaming themselves for the abuse they endure, I offer this hard-won truth: you are not crazy. Your feelings are valid. Your experiences are real, and you deserve better. Sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from those who cannot or will not see your pain. Sometimes creating distance is the only path to healing. Sometimes you have to break your own heart by leaving to prevent it from being broken over and over by staying. 5 years after the hardest decision of my life, I can say with confidence that there is life, joy, and peace on the other side of that difficult choice. The road is not easy, but it is worth every step. If my story resonates with you, if you see yourself in my experiences, know that you are not alone. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members for your own well-being? I would love to hear your stories in the comments. Please like, subscribe, and share this video if it touched something in you or if you think it might help someone who needs to hear this message today. Thank you for listening, and remember, your truth matters, even when others refuse to acknowledge it.